Okay. Um, from the video that we just watched, we, we can see some explanations there on the transportation of crude oil and crude oil products. Okay. Now, in the transportation of crude oil products, first we need, before we start off, we need to first understand the concept of this whole aspect of introduction to oil and gas management. All right. Um, Usually, from our read or from the basic deposits or reservoirs of this crude oil underneath the earth crust, we have drilling that is conducted to bring this oil to the surface. Now, from that point in the reef, there's always a need. Sorry, from that point in the reef, from the reef, there's a need to transport this product to, first of all, to the refinery where separation is going to be conducted, the refinery and the flow station where separation is going to be carried out on this crude, and then when it is separated at the flow station, it is sent to the refinery. From the refinery point, we have a fractional distillation process or a distillation process conducted on this crude to bring it into to separate it into its various fractions. Now, these fractions can then be transported. Now, it means that transportation of crude oil or natural gases or liquid petroleum products starts from the point where it comes to the surface. What does this mean? The transportation is conducted using different um, concepts or different processes. One, we have the use of transmission lines, we have the use of pipelines, we have also the use of lines that are already networked. That they could be transmission or pipeline that are what now networked. So the generating point is at the rig, but it starts its transportation from the rig to the flow stations, or then to the refinery. Or the flow station and refinery sometimes could be within the same location in some cases. And then we have separation into various fractions, right? And it's further transmitted along other pipelines. So you hear sometimes you hear of oil pipeline, you hear of petroleum line, or you hear of gas line, and the rest of it. So you could have them running interstate. Some even run from the shores to the surface, to refinery points or to tank plants, and that's where we now talk about storage. Now, intermittently, we also have storage being carried out. What do I mean? There are temporary storages that are used where, excuse me, when we have the movement from the rig to the flow station. There will be a temporary storage of the refinery before it is channeled for separation. Okay, so we are still going to come to storage. Even the unprocessed or the crude oil itself is usually stored. Its fractions are also stored. So that's why we cannot talk about transportation without talking about storage, whether of crude oil or petroleum products or um, gases, as the case may be. All right. So I'll before I give, I'll share this material later on, probably in our next class. It will be sent to everyone so you can easily get get the material. This particular one that I'm showing on the screen right now. Okay, it is very detailed, quite. It is all encompassing. It covers quite a lot on what we'll be talking about today. I'll come back to it shortly, but before then, I'll just want us to I just want us to go through this as if it's okay. Um, all right. Um, all right. Now, uh, basically for this course, part of things we'll be looking at, we'll be talking about is the the crude oil and petroleum product transportation. Then the typical modes of transportation of crude oil and petroleum products in the industry. We have three basic modes from what I've explained earlier. We'll talk about the pipeline, we'll talk about the tanker, because when they are broken into fractions, let me just explain this. From the point where we start having um, tran- where we have broken them into their fractions, or broken the crude oil into its fraction, using the word broken, but it's actually um, fractionated or distilled it into its fractions, you know, where we now have the gas. So, gas, I believe we are familiar with the fractions of crude oil, which is the gases. We have the methane, butane, propane, that are LPG. Those are the lighter components. And then you have the heavier components, which is, in particular, the heavier component starting from naphtha. Then we have kerosene, kerosene or DPK, dual purpose kerosene. That dual purpose kerosene, part of it is aviation for, part of it is for uh, uh, normal cooking or domestic use. The aviation for is what is used in flying jets, okay, and then airplanes. So we have that they are all in the same class of hydrocarbons, all right? Then apart from that, we have other components. We also have like I've mentioned, the gases. We have our naphtha, we have our gasoline, that's our premium motor spirit, which is petrol and gas. And then you have uh, your your kerosene, then you have your HGO, or that's the one called diesel. You know, they will have other heavier components to get to the greasy, and then we have bitumen, which are heavier residues or semi-solids. So as we have this fraction, especially for the liquid products and the rest of it, we discovered that they can be channeled, or they are usually channeled through different lines, pipelines, to various center depots. All right. So we have it from there to depots. Now, sometimes we also have from the depot to the filling station. When I say depot, where you have the tank farms, you know, millions or thousands, hundreds of metric tons of tanks. Those tanks are usually very large, very big, and all that. So that's a storage facility in itself. Okay, so they are channeled to these storage facilities, and sometimes you do that through the jet, through some of the jetties too, that are usually the transmission form. Okay, jetty is like the shore of the ocean or the river. Sometimes when we're getting from offshore facility, there will always be like what we call a last unit. We'll come to that later, where you can take measurements of the fluid coming into the station before it is refined or processed. All right, there are several processes that are conducted on crude oil products. All right, so back to the basics now. Then we have these different means of transportation, which is tankers or pipelines and through jetty. Okay, for the pipeline, to have the petroleum product pipeline operation, we have the pipeline system, that's the crude oil transportation. Then we have different other um, lines as the case may be. Right? Then this is just a pictorial view. If you can see this, trying to expand it, so you can get a better view. Um, so the transportation system is something like this. You know, the gasoline distribution system, and for crude oil, you have up to from this point where you have it channeled to the tankers. From the tankers are then used to supply the filling station or that are final dispensing point as, as it may be. For instance, most of our filling stations, or practically all filling stations, are usually supplied using tankers. Okay, so from storage, well, but the storage tanks usually you have uh, vessels used in transporting to fields at the depot. Some have already laid out, some bigger depots already have a channel or they laid out through pipeline, the transmission line that connects them to the refinery and all that stuff. Or in some cases, you have them being fed, that they receive products through vessels. Some of those big ships that usually carry petroleum products, they go to the jetty, they deliver at the jetty, and then from there we have it dispensed at filling stations. All right. So so, okay. All right. So basically, part of what we'll be talking about here, we're talking about the pipeline. First of all, it's in general, I've explained that already. That this pipeline, they could carry natural gas, they could carry um, liquefied natural gas, LNG. There's a difference between LNG and LPG. LNG is a liquefied natural gas. The basic component of your liquefied natural gas is your methane. Your methane is the basic component of the liquefied natural gas. It can be compressed, um, then it can start so it to be easy to handle. When I say handle, I'm talking about transportation and usage. Okay, that's the reason we have to liquefy gases most times. All right. Then we have LPG. LPG are the gases that you see in your bottles, your gas bottles. When I say bottles, I'm talking about cylinder. Most times that we use in cooking, like a cooking gas. And so the gases we use in the industry. Basically LPG. LPG is liquefied petroleum gas, and the basic component of LPG is propane and butane. Propane and butane. That's the the one three carbon atom, and that of the four carbon atom. Okay, right. So the hydrocarbon, three carbon atom, and the four carbon atom. Those are the basic components of LPG. So we still have them transported using pipeline. Okay. Now there's what we call the in this in the transportation of petroleum products or crude oil using using pipeline. we usually have two basic categories. Two basic categories that we usually have are number one, the above ground installation and the underground installation. The above ground installation are those installations that we see on the surface. Right? They are usually found at the surfaces and they are easy to access. Alright, then we have the underground installation. Those are the ones that are usually buried. For instance, the pipes that will transmit from the shores to maybe the terminal. When I say terminal, the processing terminal, where we have the processing station or refinery and the rest of it. But that kind of pipes are usually underground. You will not see them at the surface those times. Alright. So sometimes you could also have at some point where some of those pipes come to the surface. The moment it comes to the surface, it is regarded as what now um, above ground and above ground installation. Why am I saying this? It's also to understand the kind of pro- the kind of installations we have when we're talking about pipeline transportation. Above ground, underwater, and underground pipelines varying in size from the varying size from several centimeters in diameter, and they can be larger, depending on the kind of channel, the kind of product that they need to carry. All right. Now, pipelines run throughout the world from the frozen tundra of Alaska and Siberia, you know, all over to Africa to different parts of the world. We have pipelines running all over the world, even to cities, to towns. Some are even running across your village too. If you some of you that come from the Niger Delta, I'm sure you'll be conversant with the when they say pipeline vandalization. Some of these underground pipes are even located by some hoodlums, and they get once they get access, they vandalize it to it prevent that uh, scooping some of these products from these lines, and it's a very risky procedure. We also heard of some things like oil dumping and the rest of it. Now, these are um, illegal access to um, petroleum products, um, crude oil, and petroleum products. In every country, in every nation has this product. It is usually controlled by the government. That's a global process. However, there could be some illegal access to some of these products. So we're going to talk about the types of pipelines that we have. There are four basic types of pipelines in the industry, and these are four basic pipelines are flow line number one, gathering line number two, and we have crude oil trunk pipeline. Then we have petroleum product trunk pipeline. I'll take that again. We have flow line, number one. We have gathering line, number two. We have crude oil trunk pipeline and petroleum product trunk pipeline. Alright. Now, for the flow line, what do we mean? Well, describe something like flow line. The flow line usually may vary in size from like 5 centimeters diameter, like, and lower pressure fields with a few wells to much larger lines with multi wells and high pressure fields. Okay. When we talk about treating when we're treating drilling, we'll talk more about wells. When we talk about wells, not the wells in the fetching water or you fetch water from. We're talking about oil wells. Okay, we'll come to that later. So, I know I trust that some of us already have some basic knowledge about some of this work. So we have the flow lines, we have the gathering line. The flow line usually vary in important is that. But the flow lines, they move, what they usually do is for the transfer of crude oil or natural gas from the producing well to the producing field storage tank and reservoir. So when we are taking oil, crude oil or natural gas, remember that from the drilling pump, we usually have gas and oil coming out. You understand? But most times in some parts of the world, like in Nigeria, we do a lot of flaring of our gas. Meanwhile, these gases would have been able to be converted into use and even power, create energy for uh, electricity using gas turbines instead of our dams that we depend on. That is one area that we have failed as, as a nation to, to really develop. There's an area that we really need to look into. It's really of late now that they are beginning to sell gas. Now, the reason we've not been able to do that because we've never created a capacity for the usage of the gas. The gas that we produce in Nigeria, you can quote me on this, it is enormous. The gas is enough to power Nigeria and many other neighboring countries, including our industry, if we decide to really channel our resources into using gas. If we can start making gas turbines, but we are not looking in that area. Why? Because of some certain reasons that are beyond your the control of you and I at the moment. Well, that's on the light on it. However, back to basics. The flow lines are usually used to transfer this. Then we have our gathering and feeder line. Remember, I said we have flow line, gathering line, crude oil trunk pipeline, crude oil, petroleum product trunk pipeline. So under the gathering line to use them in collecting oil and gas from several locations for delivery to central accumulating points. Such of them, some examples of such central accumulating points are um, like from the crude oil tank and gas plant to maybe like a marine dock. You've heard of marine docks before. So the feeder line collect the oil and gas from several locations for delivery into the trunk line. All right. So from the gathering line, we now get connected to the what now? The trunk line. So for the trunk lines, we have two types of trunk line. We have the crude oil trunk pipeline, then we have the petroleum product trunk pipeline. Crude oil trunk pipeline and the petroleum product trunk pipeline. Okay. Now, um, it is important to note that now the natural gas and crude oil are moved from long distances. So when we are moving, considering long distances from like producing areas of marine docks to refineries, now from refineries to storage or distribution facilities, these are long distances. You understand? So we make use of larger diameter trunk pipeline. That's why they are called trunk lines. They're usually of large diameter. The same thing applies when we're now talking about petroleum products. Okay, the crude oil trunk line pipeline is for crude oil and natural gas, like from the when we are considering long distances, maybe like from the refinery, okay, to other distribution points. Then the petroleum product trunk pipeline is used specifically for petroleum products such as gasoline or your fuel oil from refineries to terminal. So when it is crude oil you are transporting within a long distance, you use the trunk pipeline. When you are transporting petroleum products, you make use the um, of the petroleum product trunk pipeline. Alright. Okay. So pipeline construction usually these are big projects of active serious activity. Pipelines are usually can be constructed working from one end to another simultaneously in sections. Okay, so when we are trying to construct this pipeline or route this pipeline, we take them usually in sections, and it is usually planned using the topographical maps. We don't just start laying pipes anyhow. No, there are a lot of assessments that are done. We look at the topography. We look at the photo photo grammetric surveys. You carry out two surveys, check the result, check the actual ground surveys also. Then before you start planning the route, obtain a right of way so that you don't just start routing pipes and follow any route. No. The route through which a pipe has been designated or designed to pass is usually described as a right of way. Right. RIGHT dash OF then dash way. Okay. That's called the right of way. Um, Now, pipeline operations usually pipelines may be okay, okay. Pipelines I'll still some little time into our next class because we're starting at almost immediately after this. Right. So pipeline operations usually excuse me, can be either privately owned or yeah, can be privately owned. That's when it is only the owner's product, but they can be common carriers. What does this mean? A company can own some of its own pipeline for its product, or sometimes we have other companies coming together to follow the same route, to use the same pipeline route. You know, such cases we describe it as a joint venture. Okay, we see them having joint venture. So typically, an operator and computer control the pumps, the valves, the regulators, the compressors, and all other fittings or components that are fixed in the pipeline system. You understand from the central location. All right. Some of these the valves, the pumps that will be positioned at strategic locations along the route wherever it's running from are usually controlled from the central location. Now there we'll be able to tell the flow rate, we'll be able to tell monitor some of these are computerized usually. In fact, most times they are computerized. We have software that are used in monitoring everything that happens within the pipeline or along the pipeline from whatever location that it is run. Then we have oil pumping. Um, so we're actually talking about pipeline operations. Several pipeline operations that we have are pipeline control. Another one is oil pumping and gas compressor station. As the name implies, that are the activities that are carried out there. Then we also have the pipeline product storage, and then we have our pipeline cleaning. For the pipeline product storage, such operation involves the crude and petroleum product pipeline terminals that have. Oh, Rosie, you said something about the crude and petroleum pipeline terminals they usually have breakout storage tank, which is like a temporary storage from which shipment is now diverted. So when you are transferring from maybe um, a from a source now to maybe from a refinery to a particular point where it's going to be delivered, you know, there will be a breakout storage tank where from there you can now do other divert. So it's more like a temporary storage tank. Now, um, other tanks at pipeline pumping stations contain for operating diesel driven pumps and pump monitors uh, or for running electrical generators. Now, um, apart from that, apart from all these operations, there's one other key operation that is very, very important, which is pipeline cleaning. Pipeline cleaning is a very important process. Why did I say this? Pipeline cleaning is I can use the human system to explain this. You know, when you eat a lot of fatty foods and a lot of fatty components, you discover that over time, um, your artery or your blood vessels rather get deposits of fat um, along them. And you hear people saying that, oh, you have too much fat in your body or in your blood or your blood and all the rest of it, and it's affecting the flow. Now, those imagine your blood now as being crude oil, the fat as being the impurities that are laden in the crude oil, in the crude oil in itself. Are you getting it? So when it passes, as it continues over time, large volume, day in, day out, we have them running through this pipeline or trunk lines and the rest of them. You discover that inside the line, the pipeline, deposits gradually form, or there are deposits that will just attach themselves to the body. Some of these deposits are impurities that are laden in the crude oil itself. So they start forming some kind of layer inside the pipe. Now, what does this cause? It leads to it now mean that you need more force, more pressure to push to be able to get a flow through. So what is happening is that the flow will no longer be normal. The volume, the integrity of the product and everything was could also drop. And then you have a drop in in volume of what is being delivered. Why? Because a lot of deposits is causing a lot of obstacles or hindrances in the movement or in the flow or the transportation of this petroleum product or the product itself. All right. So there's a need to what conduct what we call the cleaning. Now the cleaning process of um, pipelines is usually conducted using what we call PIG. PIG is PIG. Now it is not all right. Rounding off now. I'll just the pig typically is not your animal pig, but what it actually means is your pipeline investigation gauge. Pipeline investigation gauge. We have several types of them. We have some that are mandray pigs, foam pigs, we have uh, spherical pigs, and the rest of them.